It's rotating. So
Oh, the logo looks great.
it does. Hi, everybody. I'm Angie Rasmussen. We didn't really do a lot of advertising this week because you may have noticed that we haven't been around much lately. We've been traveling and we've had life happen. So sorry about that. But we're back now because boy, has today been an action-packed day, and we have a lot of stuff to correct about hantaviruses. And our favorite quack, Marty Makary, the FDA commissioner, not for much longer, got the axe today. So we're just going to chat about that real quick and get the weekend started off right. How you doing, Jess?
You know, I thought I could have a week where there was just not unprecedented times, and it didn't happen. So I'm tired.
I forgot to mention about how the New York Times discovered after 6 months, actually not really, but they've just been continually reporting on it, and they published their story after 6 months, that Vinay Prasad, the recently departed Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research Director at the FDA, the top vaccine regulatory official until April 30th, screwed with the peer review process at my journal to tank a paper that I can't say what the content was because I'm co-editor-in-chief of the journal, but it was reported accurately that it was about the fact that COVID vaccines still work for everybody.
Yep.
And so this is like something that's not even breaking news, but I spent several days this week talking to reporters at basically every single major newspaper about how our top vaccine regulatory official is corrupt and is interfering with external journals because they interfered with a different journal as well as 2 other vaccine studies to, suppress scientific gold standard science that shows that, vaccines are safe and that they work. So that's like not even something that we're going to discuss. And that's what kind of week this has been. So I feel you, Jess.
Yeah. It's been that week.
Well, one of the least pleasant parts of it for me has been every time I have opened up any kind of social media platform, whatever it is, I'm seeing stuff about hantaviruses that, boy, it sure isn't true. And
Yep.
the person saying this kind of thing knows fuck all about hantaviruses.
Yeah.
And I know you've had similar frustrations.
I have. I am bewildered and also yet not surprised to see some really terrible takes. It's both true that the predatory contrarians, the anti-science movement will not miss an opportunity to monetize a crisis. But then there's also some people who are just thirsty for the clicks and the likes. People who actually have credentials, sometimes credentials related to the topic and sometimes in the neighborhood of the topic, who are really being opportunistic about the headlines, making a lot of noise and confusing the hell out of people. I have people in my DMs sending me stuff from medical doctors, from public health folks that doesn't follow both the storyline, the evidence, the data. And look, I don't claim to be the ultimate expert, but I know my stuff on this. I have a master's degree in biohazardous threat agents and emerging infectious diseases. I studied this type of thing specifically. You are a virologist. You know a lot about hantaviruses, how they replicate, how they spread, how they infect people. And I'm exhausted because I think that right now it is very, very clear that people's COVID PTSD is on full force, and I get it. And I have a lot of empathy for that. I think you and I have a much higher frustration tolerance for public health emergencies because this is our world. These are our Super Bowls. This is when we get put into play and we're ready to go. So I can hold a lot of space for the folks who are like, not again. I can't do this again. I understand, which is why I find the opportunism of people who are spreading fear and confusion to be that much more aggravating, because it is so cruel to send people into confusion and spirals of conspiracy. I have people asking me truly, really sincere questions, but questions that I only think are being created in their minds because of sensationalism that they're reading about hantavirus.
To me, it boggles the mind because, I became a public figure essentially because of talking about COVID and my expertise in coronaviruses. And I will say this, first of all, about hantaviruses, okay? I am an expert in emerging RNA viruses, emerging zoonotic RNA viruses. So these are viruses that are not endemic. They're not normally circulating. They come up seemingly out of nowhere, but they actually come from animals. And sometimes they can cause pandemics. Sometimes they can cause very serious disease. In the case of hantavirus, that describes it. But the fact is, it doesn't do that very often. And for reasons that we'll discuss, like it's not actually likely to cause a pandemic. Yeah. It doesn't mean that we don't take it seriously. And it doesn't mean that person-to-person transmission isn't important. It doesn't mean that aerosol transmission isn't important, but it is a completely different virus from COVID-19. And I think to your point, people are really, they can't do another pandemic. Yeah. And this has actually been my huge concern about H5N1 bird flu over the past couple years, is that if that happens, like when we're in this state of still being in recovery effectively from the COVID-19 pandemic, we are in so much trouble because that pandemic would be so much worse. And I get completely where people are like, oh my God, it's airborne. This virus doesn't normally transmit from person to person. And the people who are out there and they're like, yes, this is a completely abnormal thing. Yeah. We can't even believe that this has never happened before. Yeah. Well, there's never been an outbreak of hantavirus on a cruise ship, but that doesn't mean that I'm worried for the next big Andes virus cruise ship pandemic. Exactly. I mean, this is a serious thing, and that it's an outbreak of a virus that has a very high mortality rate and is extremely pathogenic when it does get into a circumstance where it can infect a person. When it does. And it's very circumstantial. And I think a lot of these people who are erring on the side of, oh, it ain't never seen nothing like this before. Well, sure, you haven't seen anything like this before because you haven't seen anything about hantaviruses until you just looked up the Wikipedia page before you had a Substack Live about it. Yeah. And the fact is, none of us, I am probably in this whole conversation one of the biggest experts on hantavirus, not the biggest because I don't actually work on hantaviruses that much. They're not very common. Right. So I know enough about them, and we've studied them enough to know the basic things that you talked about, how they infect cells, some of the details, how they replicate, some of the details, all of that stuff, some of the details. We've got some epi studies from the outbreaks that have happened, but those of us who know will be the first to say that there's a lot that nobody knows about these viruses. And so what we have to do is just look at the evidence that we're seeing. And the evidence that I'm seeing is that this is unusual and unprecedented, but there is actually an explanation for it that makes a lot of sense in the context of what we know about both Andes virus and about cruise ships. Yeah. And the people who are out there being like, oh my God, it's airborne, like get ready, we're going to do this again. They're enjoying that a little bit too much. I did not enjoy being COVID famous. I felt that it was one of the hardest jobs that I've ever had because of the crushing responsibility of there is so much that we don't know. It is so difficult to communicate this uncertainty to a population of people who don't necessarily have a ton of comfort with scientific terms and concepts and things like RNA-dependent RNA polymerases and exonucleases that can edit proofreading errors and things like that. People don't necessarily want to, and you have to take your knowledge as a subject matter expert and try to distill out of that what's going to be actually helpful for people and communicate useful information. And it's just a really hard thing to do, especially if you screw up at all. If you word it the wrong way, if you just wear the wrong outfit that day, if you're a woman, you've just committed the worst thing. And I still have people throwing tweets back at me that, I've phrased the wrong way from 2020, early 2020. We didn't know anything. And that's how we should be approaching this now. We can talk about what we do know, but we shouldn't make up. We're not LLMs. We're not Claude. Right. Like, I'm not going to fill in the blanks with something that I just cooked up because I don't have anything to say. What I'm going to say is, there's a lot that we don't know, and maybe we
Yeah.
should find out.
Yeah. I mean, the research that I do is a lot on trust and trustworthiness and understanding the heuristics that are involved in believing information. And I'm watching it unfold right now in real time. I'm watching folks fall into things like confirmation bias, and availability bias, and these biases that the human brain just wants to make sense of things. And there are so many stories that seem like they might be connected, but people are associating causal relationships between them. So they're looking at people who are sick and people who are in the vicinity. They read Canary Islands, they read the Netherlands, and they're just connecting dots that are really disconnected. And I think there's a lot of emotional intelligence language that we should be considering here as we are communicating this unprecedented situation, that saying what we know is as important as saying what we don't know. But what I will not tolerate is people extrapolating what they think might be the case and opining or perhaps even predicting things based on what they think might happen. I just don't think that that's our place at all. I mean, I was on the news earlier today and they were really fixated on, well, what is it? Are you concerned that people are disembarking in this location? And we didn't hear about this port being a place where people are going to get off. And I'm like, okay, well, what I can tell you, what I do know is that there has not been anything observed that is unusual about how this has spread. That should be reassuring. It has been a few weeks and we have 8 cases. We have 5 confirmed. We have 3 deaths. We have 3 suspected cases. There are a much more squishier number when it comes to the number of folks who are being monitored because they were either close contacts but were not passengers on the ship. But I just think, let's not deviate from what we actually know. Yes, there are things we can, as experts, say potentially could happen, but I'm going to caveat that with saying, this is a model. This is what I believe personally. But to state it all as fact, I think is deeply, deeply harmful. I mean, Angie, we talked about this earlier. This virus is not new. It's also very rare. And yet there are people screaming on the internet that there's newness to this, that it is different from what we've seen before, that because it is now, it therefore cannot be something connected to 2018, which in 2018, there was an outbreak in Argentina. It affected 34 people, 11 people died. The genetic material, the sequencing data looks like those are pretty similar viruses, but are we done sequencing? Are we done understanding the viral evolution of this virus? Certainly not. And both things can be true. We can say it looks pretty similar to what we saw in 2018, and it could still change. But what I'm not going to do is say it's a wildly new virus. This is completely different. And because it's completely
variant,
it's a variant, right?
Let's start putting on the Greek letters. This one's alpha. Andy's alpha. I mean, this is so dumb because none of this stuff has any grounding in reality. So maybe really quick, I'm just going to give everybody a very quick rundown of what the facts actually are about this virus. And you can then pop in and give a little quick rundown about the epidemiology of the situation. But hantaviruses are RNA viruses. They are very different viruses from COVID or flu. So they are RNA genomes. That's the material that their genomes are made of. It's like DNA, except it doesn't have it does have a hydroxyl group on the 2' carbon. Who cares about that? It's RNA and it's less stable than DNA and it's more prone to mutation. That's all you need to know about it. So it is an RNA virus, but that's pretty much what it has in common. It's a segmented virus. So its genome is in 3 pieces, not 8 like influenzas, not 1 like SARS coronavirus 2, 3, and they're weird. They can circularize the sense of them, like you can read them both ways. In some places, they're ambisense actually, so they're positive and negative. It's kind of they're a wild family of viruses. So they're very different virologically from flu or COVID. Like the process they use a different receptor. They don't have spike. They have something called a glycoprotein. It's actually 2 proteins. I mean, they're just very different viruses. So you can't compare these viruses to these other respiratory viruses, even though they infect the same tissues. They also don't infect the same tissues, actually, because hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which is what you get if you inhale these hantaviruses, including Andes virus, is a disease primarily of the epithelial cells that are in the lower respiratory tract, not the upper respiratory tract. So seasonal flu, COVID, SARS-1, RSV, all of these things, they can grow in the lower tract, but they primarily colonize the upper respiratory tract. And that's why they can spread, because they shed a lot of virus out of the upper respiratory tract, which is where you breathe normally.
Right.
When you have an infection in the lower lungs, you can shed virus, and you probably do have a lot of virus depending on, how sick you are, and depending on the virus. But sometimes that virus doesn't necessarily shed, and it will only shed then like when you cough. And so people have to be around you when you're coughing a lot in order to get exposed. You can't get it from just being in a room with the person who is breathing normally. And you're not going to get it from somebody who's not symptomatic, because if you have a rip-roaring infection throughout your lower respiratory tract, you have viral pneumonia and you are not asymptomatic. You know that you are sick. So it's not like we have silent cases like with SARS-2, where people are shedding a ton of virus with every breath and every word that they take out in the real world, and nobody knows that they're sick. This virus, you don't get it unless you're already, getting it from somebody who's already sick with it.
Yeah.
And it's very rare and circumstantial for it to be transmitted from person to person. That's actually even kind of debatable. There's a whole lot of academic back and forth about the quality of the papers that show human to human transmission. But notably, it's always in a hospital setting or a setting that's exactly like what's being described on this cruise ship, where people are in really close physical proximity with each other for a very long period of time after they're already symptomatic and ill. That is a great circumstance for a virus that happens to colonize the respiratory tract, that's not being shed regularly, but can be shed under certain circumstances, to accumulate at a high enough level in the environment for somebody else who's there to get a high enough dose of it to get sick themselves. They are very unlikely to go on and spread that to somebody else. They are very unlikely to have a silent infection, even if they have a long incubation period. So that's what the deal is with this virus. It's very different from COVID. It's very different from seasonal flu. And it's very unlikely to cause a pandemic, because the last thing is, you don't get variants unless you get a whole bunch of human cases.
Right.
Because what variants are, they are mutations. And because this is a segmented virus, it actually can evolve faster. So for all the people who are saying, and I saw one very prominent epidemiologist on Substack say that this virus doesn't mutate very fast. Well, it's an RNA virus that's segmented, so it can reassort, which means the segments can mix up with another virus, and it can also acquire mutations more quickly than a DNA virus can. So it can evolve quickly. But in order for it to do that, it has to replicate a lot. And it's not replicating a lot if it's not infecting a whole bunch of different people.
Right.
So it's not going to actually have opportunities to reassort or make mutations. And reassortment isn't as big of a risk with these viruses the way it is with influenza, because there's influenza all over the place in like all of these wild birds, all of these different species, and they can fly. And so they can just pop up anywhere. But hantaviruses are transmitted by rodents, and they are not like uniformly across the land. Every rat and mouse has a hantavirus infection. So you don't actually see hantaviruses popping up in new places necessarily, because at least as far as I know, rodents can't fly. So, so you don't see the kind of distribution with these hantaviruses that you would see with something like influenza. Therefore, there's just not going to be as many of them around. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of variants. And who cares if it's a variant or like, just an Andes virus that somehow gets a foothold and starts spreading? That would be bad either way. I did break the rule that you set earlier, Jessica, in terms of making predictions, though, because today in the Substack article that we wrote with the Save America movement, I said that I would retire and never do virology again if a pandemic resulted from an Andes virus variant. Well, because I feel really confident that that's not going to happen.
I mean, it's incredible to me that people can't, separate the difference between, yes, it's an RNA virus. RNA viruses mutate a lot. However, we've been dealing with this situation since early April, right? At least that's kind of when it seemed to have emerged, with the first case being reported having been exposed in Argentina on a remote birding excursion. It's May 8th. So we're perhaps at least halfway through, closer to the end of like the incubation period for the earliest cases, right? And we've got 8 cases. We've got a few suspected cases. We've got many more people being monitored, but we are not dealing with the type of replication, the type of R naught that we saw with flu, that we saw with SARS-CoV-2, both viruses having potential for pandemic, right? Because they spread so quickly. One person can infect so many people. So far, it seems like hantavirus is behaving the same way. It requires long, close contact with an infected person. Now, perhaps it's, the dose can be sufficient, the viral dose can be sufficient from a shorter time, but it's still close contact. We're not talking about ambient air being a spreader of this, where somebody was passing through, like, say, measles. Measles is so contagious that you can be in a room hours after a person with measles was in that room and be at risk of infection. We're not dealing with that with hantavirus. And the reason why we're saying this is because we've actually seen a hantavirus outbreak. Like I mentioned, in 2018, there was an outbreak. It affected 34 people. 11 people died. We can take a lot from that. It was a smaller outbreak. The case fatality rate was pretty high, about 30%, which is not ideal. But also, there's like a level of this virus being a little bit dumb, right? We always describe diseases like Ebola as being stupid viruses because they kill the host too fast to spread. Hantavirus is kind of dumb in that sense, right? Hantavirus kills the host if they're really seriously infected pretty quickly. The 3 people who died were not sick for a very, very long time. We saw people getting infected and dying within 7 to 10 days. At least that's what if you look at the outbreak data. So we're not dealing again with something that is just causing multiple rounds of multiplying effects on the people that they're around. That said, it is going to be a very complicated and long process to do all the contact tracing, because they are trying to make sure that people who are not passengers, but who are perhaps plane passengers with people who were on that plane, are being monitored. That flight attendant is not completely out of the woods. While they tested negative for Andy's virus yesterday, it doesn't mean that they couldn't test positive later, right? I don't know if what their sex is, but they were symptomatic, but we can be reassured that their symptoms were not a result of an active Andes virus infection, but they're still going to be monitoring them. And so I just think, let's think about this in the bigger picture of disease control and mitigation. We're trying to understand how big this is going to get. And so far, this many weeks into it, it's not very big. That does not mean we don't think it's a big deal. It is a big deal. Hantavirus is a serious disease when it infects a person.
Hantavirus is like bird flu with one big difference, and that's that bird flu has the potential to become a pandemic virus. Right. Hantavirus does not, but they're similar in their pathogenicity. So, I mean, this is something I think that a lot of people don't necessarily think about unless they spend all of their time thinking about viruses like I do, and specifically viral pathogenesis. But transmission and pathogenesis are two separate things. So the ability of a virus to transmit from host to host and the ability of a virus to cause disease in any given host is separate oftentimes. Like, a virus does not care whether it causes disease. I don't like to call viruses stupid or smart, and I don't like to assign them emotions, because they're really more like software programs. They're like computer programs that are just programs to make more viruses. It's like God or whatever, like the creator, like sat down with Claude Code and decided to build something and like made a little thing that self-replicates and just makes more of itself. And that's what viruses do. That's their biological imperative. That's all they care about doing. They don't care if they make the host sick. And like you said, I mean, it's not smart from a virus's point of view to kill the host too quickly before it can transmit. Ebola is smart, though, because most of the transmission happens from handling dead bodies, Jess.
That's true.
It's figured out a way to move beyond life,
right,
to perpetuate itself. It's a true virus. It's not really alive.
That's the true haunted virus. Instagram kept transcribing my mention of hantavirus as haunted virus.
Well, maybe that is why that, old man yelling at clouds medical influencer, spelled it Hantavirus, Haunta. Hanta. Like, like the Haunted Mansion, or I kind of saw it as like trying to just like British it up, add a touch of class.
Yeah, French it up.
It's actually Korean, because hantavirus is short for Hantan virus, which is where it emerged. But guess what? USA, it emerged in US GIs who were stationed there during the Korean War. That was when it was defined first as a clinical syndrome. That's the old world hantavirus, though. The hantaviruses from Asia and Europe cause something called hantavirus renal or hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome.
Right.
That actually isn't as bad as you would think the hemorrhagic fever would be worse. But in this case, it's actually not like Ebola hemorrhagic fever. It's usually milder. And the pulmonary syndrome is worse. And the reason why is because, like H5N1, it preferentially infects cells in the lower respiratory tract. So as soon as you get enough virus, and it doesn't infect them very well, so you have to get a lot of virus in order to get a productive infection. And by the time you get that much virus in that part of your body, because of that part of your body does something pretty important, and that's where blood gas exchange occurs. That's where you get oxygen. So if that gets screwed up, you're in real trouble. And that's why if you get one of these viruses that preferentially infects those cells, we would call it tropism, that it has lower respiratory tract tropism. You're starting off with viral pneumonia. So you are going to be a lot sicker than if you get infected with something that infects the cells in your nose that may or may not move further south eventually. So like H5N1, if you get a case, you're more likely to have severe disease. And that's why these often have such high mortality rates, because the recognized cases are the cases that do start off identified basically because the person is so sick that they're coming in to try to get treatment so that they don't die. We may be missing other cases. We don't know, but there's not that many cases of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome because it's not very transmissible from person to person. So people can pretty easily mitigate the risk of getting it. And that is pretty much, I live in Canada. So I've been telling every Gordon Barb in the country that when they're opening up their summer lake home, they should put on an N95 if they think that any mice have been nesting in there. And that is indeed, even though there has been person-to-person transmission where they think that this outbreak started, potentially by a bird watching location where there were a bunch of rats and they're doing some surveillance to try to figure it out. I'm not very optimistic about that because Javier Milei, Argentina's president, who Trump has modeled a lot of his Doge cuts to the HHS department, to American Science after, has basically ended all of Argentinian science. So I'm not sure who exactly is going to be trapping these rodents and testing them for Andes virus, but they are looking into it. And this outbreak, like all hantavirus outbreaks, did start with exposure to rodents. And that's something that you can easily mitigate. So please do, if you are exposed to rodents, first and foremost, by respiratory protection, and use disinfectants, either bleach or disinfectant that says that it kills pathogens and viruses. There's a number of different kinds of disinfectants that can do it, but just be careful and don't expose yourself to rodents. That's how you avoid a hantavirus infection. You don't need to worry about avoiding a hantavirus pandemic, because I feel pretty, again, confident that we're not ever going to have to deal with one of those unless something very dramatic changes.
So, you just went mute.
I did.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. It's always terrifying to hear that I've gone mute. It's like my worst nightmare. I don't know. Do you have anything else to add, Jess? Like I've seen so much profoundly stupid discussion and criticism also of WHO officials. So, Maria Van Kerkhove has had a very, very difficult job.
Extremely.
In her role as the technical lead for the COVID-19 pandemic. And now in her, Maria's specialty, she's an epidemiologist and is specializing in emerging infectious diseases and the outbreaks that they cause. So she's leading these efforts. And I think that she has been exceptionally careful and I think pretty good actually at explaining a lot of the context that you need to take this person-to-person transmission in. So
Yeah.
it's like, yes, it's aerosol person-to-person transmission, but it is not, I just went to the grocery store and like got, Andy's virus from the checkout girl. Like this is, you're sleeping with the person in the same bed. You're sharing a room with them. You're eating all your meals with them. You're going to see them because they're the ship's doctor.
Yeah.
You're in close proximity and coughing probably around these people. You're really getting a lot of opportunities to get a sufficient dose of the virus to get productive infection. But that doesn't describe conditions that are going to occur in the real world that are going to lead to widespread, sustained human-to-human transmission chains.
Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat that I want to address, and one of them is related. People are asking, well, how concerned should we be about people who live in the states in which the states have been identified as either cases are being, people who are being monitored for having contact with passengers on the plane, not necessarily or on the ship, or actual passengers on the ship who are being monitored. And again, it's just like you said, this should not be introducing any type of xenophobia, any type of, fear mongering about people who are from certain places or went to certain places. We're talking about somebody would need to be symptomatic, and you would need to be very close to that person who is actively sick to be at risk. This is not something that is just a silent lurking threat in the United States because there are people who were on that ship or who passed through places with people on that ship who are now back in the United States. This should not change your vacation plans. This should not change your weekend plans. This is not lockdown. This is not quarantine and isolation for the general public. I can't overstate how this is not something that we are telling folks to do. And it's amazing to me because I feel like we always get accused of being like so pro lockdown, so pro, masking, and we're not telling anybody.
Lock her down and force the vaccines that don't exist on everybody.
To get vaccinated. There isn't a vaccine. We're not telling anybody to like mask unless you want to mask, unless you're going to be in a high risk place where masking works to prevent a lot of infectious diseases and respiratory viruses. But we are not telling people to brace for impact. And if there were reasons to do that, don't you think we would be telling folks to do that? Don't you think in our altruistic desire to reduce harm, we would be saying, hey, now is a good idea to do XYZ? We're not. We're saying you are okay. If you're not, we're going to let you know. And speaking of the vaccine, somebody asked on the Instagram live, asking about this Nature article that talked about how there is candidates for hantavirus vaccines. And yes, there are, right? But as we mentioned earlier, hantavirus is so rare that to financially justify the massive, expensive investment required to take a candidate, a vaccine option from preclinical trial to phase 3 to market takes tons of money. I mean, let's look back at Operation Warp Speed. It took billions with a B, billions of dollars to expedite that process and to also make it happen quickly. Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't see a hantavirus vaccine in the near future. I think it'll take years to get there because there also isn't a demand, right? We are prioritizing vaccines that have a high disease burden, right?
There's no need. You can prevent a hantavirus infection by literally like either using bleach, wearing like an N95, and if you don't like public health masks, go buy it at Home Depot. Like,
right.
It's like if you're gonna paint or sand something, like you put that shit on, or don't go in your garage where the mice are nesting.
But
it's
also
pretty simple. Like you can do that instead of getting or making or spending millions or billions of dollars to make a vaccine that, also, correct me if I'm wrong, but can you imagine the poor marketing executive who gets told, guess what? You get to roll out the mandatory hantavirus vaccine. Like,
it will not be mandatory because it is not a public health threat. As we mentioned, and yes, the question about this article was specifically like for providing it for the military, which brings up a great point. The military does get access to vaccines that the general public doesn't because of their unique exposures to places in which certain threats, biological threats, could be a problem for our military. But again, it's not even a high enough priority for the military because the military are not persistently exposed to hantavirus. And even when it comes to the United States, 90% of cases have been reported west of the Mississippi in mostly 4 states, the 4 corners. It's Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. And even still, the burden is very specific. It seems like it's most present in deer mice. And a lot of people who live in those areas know that if you see deer mice or if you've got deer mice rodents droppings, to handle it, like you said, using proper precautions. So it is easily preventable. It's not just, again, this silent threat that's just lurking about.
It's rodent control is literally what it is. And
Yeah.
it's rodent control, and it's like respiratory protection, and that's it. And look, I love vaccines. I'm the co-editor in chief of the journal Vaccine. I'm like hardcore like vaccine super fan. And I literally don't think we need a hantavirus.
No. People like, if there was one, would you get it? No, because I don't need it.
I wouldn't need it. Like,
exactly.
Like, nobody needs it. I would probably not get it. You know, I would want to get it just because I love getting vaccines that are safe and effective, just to prove that like I can. And you know what? It never hurts to just have like a little extra something on your immune system, you know? And I don't buy that echinacea shit. I buy like hard data, and vaccines. They're my echinacea. So I probably would, but I kind of wouldn't on principle, because
exactly
money that would be used to develop that vaccine would be used to develop a different vaccine for a pathogen that would change a lot more people's lives.
Exactly.
And to me, a hantavirus vaccine wouldn't be a good use of resources. And that's also why a lot of virologists don't work on it, because the funding agencies have decided that we should work on it, but not that much, because it's not that big of a problem. So we shouldn't be completely ignorant about it. Yeah. But we also shouldn't put all of our resources into understanding something that it's not that it's not a risk, but it's a pretty remote risk. Yeah. And there are other risks that are very clearly bigger risks. So again, the difference between H5N1 and hantavirus, which both currently have, they're not similar, but they have some things in common. They don't spread efficiently between people. Spread between people is highly circumstantial, and they both cause severe lower respiratory tract disease. And that's why they don't spread efficiently between people. The big difference with flu is that it's much more likely that it's going to acquire the ability to spread between people than a hantavirus is. Mm-hmm. And that's why if you gave me 2 very interesting projects that Angie, the academic with unlimited resources, just gets to decide like which of these just tickles my fancy more, I'm always going to go with the bird flu, because that is something that has the potential to have a serious impact. Whereas the hantavirus, of course, it's a serious impact if you're one of the unfortunate people that gets hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Mm-hmm. But for the whole world, the impact on millions of people is virtually nothing for hantavirus. I'm telling you, in 2 weeks, all of these people who today are, this is a completely unprecedented event. This is both like never mutating and always mutating. Yeah. Going to be no variants and variants everywhere.
In 30 years, we've seen less than 900 cases in the United States. In 30 years. That's an average of 30 cases per year total.
I meant to look it up. How many hantavirus cases are there in the US every year? I would guess less than 50.
That's what I said. It's like about 30, because we've seen about 30 cases per year. In 30 years, we've had less than 900. So it's about 30 a year. It's truly, the incidence is extremely low. And listen, let's talk about the other kind of elephant in the room here. If we're talking about what we're going to take to actually mitigate this, and a vaccine is likely not one of them, because again, you cannot justify the extremely high cost for that. But let's think about this. If we did do one, we'd probably do an mRNA vaccine, right? What's happening to mRNA vaccine research right now, Angie?
Well, there's none of it. As a matter of fact, it's just done.
We are defunding it because we have an administration that doesn't believe in the principle of it. They don't believe in the science of it. They believe it's more harmful than it is beneficial. And so there is no way on earth that we would divert funds, whatever funds we don't have anymore, from something like influenza mRNA vaccines for seasonal or for pandemic flu to hantavirus vaccine. There's just zero chance that we would spend the money to do that, especially as a federal government.
The only thing, something that just occurred to me, Jess, that has been bothering me since the idea was floated, and I know we've talked about this a little bit before, although this is kind of my thing, is that, the lab leak is being used as a
Oh yeah.
justification for tanking all of science.
Yep.
And part of that is this claim that the NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya, has made that previously under public health tyrant Joe Biden, we had a pandemic playbook that basically went like, give reckless virologists tons and tons of money so that we can go out and like hunt down and find a bunch of new zoonotic viruses and rodents and what have you. Hantaviruses for sure. I was involved in a DARPA proposal that is the subject of numerous conspiracy theories in which we were planning to look at Bunya viruses, which is what hantaviruses were called before the taxonomy people got a hold of them. But anyways, I digress. Hantaviruses have always been of interest, but doing virus discovery studies like that is to find out, the diversity of viruses that are out there that we might have to worry about. According to Director Bhattacharya, this was step one of the US pandemic playbook. We would go out and hunt these viruses down. We'd find them. We'd bring them back to our labs and juice them up and make bioweapons out of them that we would then make vaccines against to put in the national stockpile. So we'd make vaccines to protect against these dangerous viruses / bioweapons that we made. And then we'd make these vaccines. And then like Merck and like Pfizer and Moderna, like they just make it rain on us. And Fauci like gets all of the money. And we all just laugh at the normies because then when our pandemic happens, they all die. And we all just like go, dive into our like Scrooge McDuck pools full of money.
Yeah.
That's definitely a great description, very accurate of my academic career.
Yeah.
That's a terrible description of pandemic preparedness. And that has nothing to do with actually what pandemic preparedness was under President Biden, under President Trump's first term, under President Obama, and under President Bush before him. All of these presidents had a pandemic plan, including Trump, that was actually not that different from one to the next. It was different in terms of like the virus that they were planning to respond to and things like that. But the pandemic preparedness playbook actually had a lot more to do with like healthcare resources and how do we keep hospitals open and things like that. How many ventilators do we have? How many ambulances do we have? At what point does our healthcare system collapse? Those are more important questions than like, did somebody get an R01 grant to go do virus discovery in rodents in like somewhere in South Asia? Like
right.
It's so ludicrous, but this kind of comes down to that, where the idea is that any kind of research on any of these weird things is like what causes pandemics. And sure enough, I have seen some stuff that's like, well, this is a little bit different than the 2018 one. Maybe it's because some virologist was out there, doing a little DGOF, little dangerous gain of function research, poking around and sticking some mutations in there. And that's what's going on. That's our new variant. I mean, this is another level of profoundly stupid. To make it a hantavirus lab leak on top of a hantavirus pandemic that's about to start happening. But I think this is where we go with this. When people are getting up there and there's no leadership that's based on any kind of scientific fact or accuracy, you have all these people stepping in. And some of them, I like to think many of our colleagues are people like us who are doing this because we think that it's really important that people have information that's actually reliable and accurate. But then there's a lot of people who just really miss like that dopamine hit that they got during the pandemic when they saw themselves on TV all the time. Personally, not a fan, but part of the job. And I think that there's a big difference between people who see this type of work as part of their jobs, as we do, and people who see this work as
an opportunity.
I can't wait to see what is in store for Dr. Angela Rasmussen next. What else will I become an expert in? Perhaps I need to learn about intercontinental ballistic missiles or drone warfare. I have a PhD. It's all good.
I mean, honestly, Angie, the one thing that this makes me think about too, in how tragic this whole situation is how deeply embarrassing it is as Americans, as American scientists, to have witnessed what this is and not be in the WHO. Talk about, a horrible setback in our ability to respond. I mean, I know the CDC is now coordinating and they set their emergency response or emergency alert to like the lowest threshold, but we are totally, outside of the network, a network that is responsible for things like data sharing, contact tracing, so much multilateral coordination, and here we are, just sitting on our hands like a bunch of lame ducks, because we have completely politicized public health and have not understood, despite having lived through a global pandemic, that global health security is national health security. And we are watching the fallout from that. And Hantavirus is not going to be the next pandemic, but there will be one. And we're going to be in much, much worse of a situation when that happens outside of being part of the WHO. And so, yes, we're here to tell you all the reasons why you should be concerned and shouldn't be concerned. And we're telling you right now is not a time to be activated and triggered and on high alert about hantavirus. But we are waving the flags, the big red flags of us and our isolationism being a huge, huge disadvantage to our ability to prepare for and respond to actual threats that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, this is not the virus to worry about, but
Yep.
it is the administration and the regime to worry about.
Yep.
I mean, it's good that it's Andy's virus, to be perfectly
Truly,
honest.
truly.
I mean, it could be something a lot worse. I was thinking about it, and there's so many other things, that could just come out of nowhere. I've been working on emerging coronaviruses, right, since 2013 when MERS emerged. I've written so many grants. We're at the beginning of, we talk about SARS, we talk about MERS, talk about the next one could be a pandemic. The next one was a pandemic. Like, it literally was a pandemic. And the stuff that we took for granted, we said so many times, we warned people so many times that we didn't even pay attention to our own warning because we were so used to saying it. And then it happened. And this time I feel like it's going to be much worse, because back then people listened to the warnings, at least the people who thought that it was worthwhile to do research on those things and to start to develop vaccines. We don't have hantavirus vaccines. We have preclinical work.
Yeah.
We also had preclinical work for coronavirus vaccines, and we had actually quite far along clinical trial work for SARS coronavirus 1. And the reason is because in that early phase, if you put up SARS 1 next to hantavirus, SARS 1 is the virus that looks like it could cause a pandemic, and hantavirus is not. So that's the one that you make vaccines for. And even though SARS 1 didn't become a pandemic, it is because of those SARS 1 vaccines that we got vaccines for SARS 2 in 10 months.
Yeah.
So I really want people to understand that too, that don't worry about this virus, but worry about like the lost capacity for the next virus that's going to come along. Because if we don't know that much about it, and we don't even have the information that we took care to invest in getting prior to the SARS 2 pandemic, if you thought the COVID-19 pandemic was bad, boy, are you not going to like the next one. And I think that that's the take-home message that people really should be getting from this hantavirus thing. Don't lose sleep about hantavirus. Lose sleep about what's happening to science and what that means for your health, not about this virus.
100%. 100%. Yep. I mean, we always get accused of being, just overzealous about vaccines and over vaccinating kids and too many doses. And we're like, here we are saying, you don't need a vaccine for hantavirus. You're probably never going to see a vaccine for hantavirus, at least in the near future. We're trying to tell you, like, these are the things to be concerned about, because there are reasons to be concerned and then there are reasons to not be. And I think that's our best ability to be honest science communicators to our audiences, to say, look, this is not all about panic and doom and fear mongering. We are trying to balance it all to help you make informed choices for yourself. So couldn't agree more, Angie. And perhaps we should do this again next week with another situation update, because the situation is evolving. It's constantly changing. And next time, let's include Saskia, because Saskia, who is another infectious disease epidemiologist, pretty much grew up with hantavirus living in Arizona. So I would love to loop her in here and hear from her how she's managed her risk as an Arizona resident and managed it even too as an infection control specialist.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that, there haven't been like huge outbreaks, but I'm pretty sure that she's managed hantavirus patients because she was a senior infection control and prevention expert in one of Arizona's largest hospital systems.
That's right.
So I think that's a fantastic idea. And you know what, even if like there's another virus the next week, or people are tired of hantavirus because I don't know what hell next week's going to bring. But I'll gladly do a show and with you and Saskia. And I think we should get back into our old routine. Really quick before we go though, Jess, like I just want to give you the opportunity to just shout the good news again.
Marty Makary is getting the boot.
Yes. It's so
Happy
great.
Friday to us all. Now, I don't know who's going to replace him. That could also be like, a little jump scare in the corner, but at least he's out. He has been a thorn in our side for years.
He's been a thorn in our side for years, and I really can't wait to watch him rehabilitate his academic career as the head of gastrointestinal surgery or whatever at Johns Hopkins by going on like Del Bigtree's The High Wire with Robert Malone and talking about the entire conspiracy that has ruined the federal government and got both of them fired because they're actually too big a quacks to even last in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Health and Human Services Department.
What a time. What a time to be alive.
It's an exceptional achievement, actually. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing what's next for old Marty Makary. And, I might just dog at their heels a little bit. And maybe if Saskia is around next week, we could actually have a drink during the show. Yeah. Amazing. But thank you so much, Jess. And I'm so glad we got our little cocktail-free cocktail party going on again.
Staying hydrated.
Ditto. Have a great weekend, everybody. Keep us, keep your questions coming and we'll answer them as we get them. We're experimenting also as we have time, which, is something that comes in fits and spurts, but we are experimenting with lots of new different ways to communicate about this stuff. So if you have questions, let us know what they are and we'll try to answer them somehow.
Sounds good. All right.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. Bye, Angie.
Bye-bye. See ya.